Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. In this video, an HOA president fenced off my family's land and then started charging people to use my private road, stole my property, and told me that her lawyers eat little landowners like me for breakfast. She had no idea she just picked a fight with the wrong person. The title story is titled, HOA Karen Put Fence Around My Property Unaware I Own the Land. So there is a piece of land that's been passed down in my family for generation after generation. It is pretty sizable, but at the same time it's almost completely undeveloped and the surrounding area has historically been mostly rural, so it's not as valuable as it might sound. If anything, it's a bit of a pain to maintain, but I do so out of a sense of familial obligation and more than a little pride. However, all that has started to change lately because the area has also been getting less and less rural in recent years. The nearest city has been expanding pretty dramatically, so now there are suburbs directly adjacent to my property. This has caused a few problems here and there, but for the most part it's been a pretty painless transition with one key exception, the neighboring HOA. We had a few minor disagreements here and there in the years leading up to this particular incident, but nothing that prepared me for the outrageous audacity of what was about to happen. Looking back, I can still scarcely believe that it played out like this, but I guess some people just think the world owes them everything. Anyway, this particular incident started with me heading overseas for work, to the Philippines in particular. I was going to spend 2 years there for a contract and then I would head back home. It was a pretty lengthy stay, but I had taken trips like this for work before, so I already had a system in place for my property. Specifically, there was a local property management company that I could hire to handle any problems that might arise in my absence, as well as deal with day-to-day operations like checking for damage, stopping trespassers, and handling taxes. It was all very straightforward and I had no doubts that they'd be able to deal with any minor issues. Now, there's one particular aspect of my property that makes it unusual, and this is the heart of the entire disaster that is about to unfold. So my property actually includes a paved road that used to be fairly unknown and only of interest to a few ecologists and farmers as well as my family. However, since the new suburbs have been expanding next door, it has actually become something of a connection to the city. It's certainly not their only possible route, but it is a shortcut that saves a ton of time for travel in either direction. Most critically of all, the HOA of the suburbs was granted access to use this paved road via an easement agreement with the family member who owned this land before me. The agreement was put in place when the community was much smaller than it is now, so I doubt they anticipated the level of traffic the road might use, but it's not particularly burdensome. As long as people respect the road and don't damage my property, I don't really mind if they use it, mainly because I consider myself a pretty private person and I'm happy to keep a low profile. And so I went on my business trip, lived in the Philippines for 2 years and had a great time. The work was hard, but the results were satisfying. I received regular reports from the property management company and there didn't seem to be any problems with the taxes or trespassing. However, when the 2 years were up and I flew back home, I found a very puzzling scene on my property. You see, someone had built a fence on my land pretty close to the border with the suburbs, complete with a gate and several signs that said no trespassing. My first guess was that the property management company had wildly overstepped their boundaries. I figured that maybe they were going to claim that this was part of their strategy to keep trespassers off the land and that they were going to massively overcharge me for the cost of installing the fence, the gate and the signs. Well, the truth turned out to be much stranger than that. I immediately got out my phone and called this company, but they were just as confused as I was. In fact, they were surprised that this section was even part of my property. Apparently the HOA had installed all this crap on their own, and when the management company had approached them to ask what the hell they were doing, the HOA seemed to have a list of rules, regulations and bylaws that proved that this land actually belonged to them. So the HOA claimed they got permission from me to make all these additions, which was yet another lie, as well as being oddly contradictory with their assertion that this land belonged to them. After that very enlightening call, I took a closer look at these bizarre new additions, and sure enough, the signs had small print at the bottom claiming that this area was under the authority of the local HOA, which was news to me. I then went and took a look at how far the fence extended. So it actually cut through my pasture pretty aggressively, so it wasn't like they had just installed this whole setup right on the border. To make things worse, the gate even had a lock on it. The only thought going through my head at the time over and over was, surely this cannot be legal. And if you thought that this couldn't get any wilder, then I've got news for you. When I got back home and checked online to see if there were any social media posts or even official notices from the HOA, I discovered that people were complaining about greenbelt maintenance fees. Based on the dates, it seems that these fees were implemented a little less than a year ago. It didn't take a genius to put two and two together, so I had a very strong suspicion that these were directly related to this new fence. If they were charging people for access to my road, then I'd been generously allowing them to freely use it for years, and then that would be the last straw for me. At this point, I decided that I finally needed to get some concrete answers right from the horse's mouth. I found the HOA president's number and gave them a call. They didn't answer, big surprise. I then went down the list of the HOA board, calling the vice president, then the treasurer, and then the secretary. It was hard to keep my temper in check because I knew that maybe some of them really were legitimately busy or didn't notice, but it sure felt like they were intentionally ignoring me. However, I was able to get through to the secretary, who seemed pretty confused. When I asked what the hell was going on with this illegal project on my land, they got very flustered and said that the president had already discussed it with me. Hadn't she? And no, she most certainly had not, but apparently that is the lie she told the board. She said that she had already met up with me and discussed the easement agreement that had been set to expire last year. According to her, I was perfectly willing to let them take over the maintenance of the land, especially since I was going to be abroad. It was such a bald-faced bunch of lies that I couldn't help but laugh. Who did this woman think she was? But the secretary had not personally done anything wrong, at least as far as I could tell, so I politely thanked her and ended the call. I still did not have all the pieces, but I had more than enough. I needed to have a chat with the HOA president and let her know that I was not gonna stand for her nonsense. To make sure I was prepared, I went and gathered as much documentation as I could find, from the deed to the most recent land surveys I had. I brought my copy of the easement agreement as well, but I didn't know how much help that was gonna be. I really didn't want this to come down to a he said she said situation, but that was a distinct possibility. Anyway, I headed on over to confront the HOA president. I was not gonna bother waiting for her to return my call. I was going straight over to her house and getting this over with. Naturally, she was incredibly rude and dismissive, but you probably did not need me to tell you that. From the instant she opened the door, there was a sneer on her face and she wrinkled her nose as though I was a piece of trash that was dirtying up her front step. As soon as I mentioned who I was, she got even colder. I had not even finished asking about the gate before she said that she was gonna call security if I was going to act aggressively. Mind you, I have not even raised my voice at this point. All I had done was offer her the deed and recent survey. However, I decided that discretion was the better part of valor, so I went ahead and waited for her to make her excuses. I expected that she would try to say that she had no idea what I was talking about, but she was even more audacious than that. This woman straight up said that the HOA had exercised their rights and claimed land that had been abandoned by its owner. Specifically, she said that because they improved the land, it now fully belonged to them, and since they improved the land, they now had the right to collect fees from the whole neighborhood for maintaining their green belt. It took all of my self-control not to burst out laughing when she said they were asserting their squatters' rights. I was utterly stunned and all the pieces fell into place. She further added the HOA owned my road and now has the right to charge non-HOA members toll fees for using it. Yes, Karen, that's totally how the law works, but I have to applaud her for her scummy little scheme here. It was extremely clever. At this point, I was pissed off beyond belief. Karen and probably the rest of the HOA really thought that I was going to take this lying down. It was clear from the look on her face that she had never once considered considered that I might actually come over to complain after I got back home from my work abroad. She must have taken my shocked silence for resigned acceptance, because she then went on to taunt me, saying that if I really wanted to ruin myself, then I could get in touch with the HOA's lawyers. I recall her exact words being that they eat little landowners like you for breakfast, and that I was bringing down all the property values in the neighborhood with my ugly, overgrown lot. The woman was gaining confidence before my very eyes, and I was in awe. She stepped forward and shoved her finger in my chest, her lips curled in a gleeful smirk. In fact, our lawyers will be getting in touch with you since you now owe us $15,000 for the improvements we made. I felt like I was disassociating with reality, I guess. At that point, it seemed like this was happening to someone else, which was probably for the best. If I'd been fully myself, then I absolutely would have laughed in her face, and if I'd done that, then she might have suspected something. And no, it was for the best that she thought that I was completely overwhelmed by the splendid reputation of the HOA and how brazen her threats were. Even when I turned and left, she still hurled insults at me until I was back in my truck. I was not listening to her at all though, and all my focus was on planning my next move. Getting in touch with the local county planning office was my first priority to report this insane behavior. Now that Karen was threatening to sue me on top of everything else, I was feeling a little overwhelmed. But I knew that justice was actually on my side. I also started shopping around for lawyers and exploring my legal options. At the local county planning office, I reported the unauthorized construction, including some pictures I took of the fence. I also mentioned what Karen had said about the fee collection, but I wasn't sure exactly which department would handle that. I then went ahead and checked out some public records. I realized that I was only going by Karen's word that the easement had expired and gave her such incredible leeway for abusing someone else's land, so I wanted to see if there were any holes I could find in her logic. To my immense relief, I discovered that there was a copy of the road easement agreement with the HOA. It had not been renewed because I was abroad, true, but that also meant that the HOA actually didn't have permission to use my road at all. It had been the obligation of the board to inform the residents of this, but instead of that, they tried to monetize and exploit my absence. Also, surprisingly, I found some paperwork filed regarding a road maintenance assessment fee of $50 per HOA household. That added up to a lot, but what really surprised me was that they were claiming this was maintenance for the road. Suffice it to say, they'd never spent a single cent on repairs or maintenance to the road on my property. In spite of that, they had still managed to collect over $30,000, so who knows where that money had gone. You'll be pleased to hear that I immediately made arrangements to revoke their access to my land. I posted legal signage, registered with the county, then went home and got started on the installation of a heavy-duty gate with security cameras. I decided to set it up right behind the monstrosity of an HOA gate they had already installed, which meant that they could get through their own gate but wouldn't actually be able to pass because mine would still be in the way. And for the cherry on top, I went ahead and put a sign out front that read "Private property, road access revoked due to trespassing and fraudulent claims. No entry without written permission," in big bold text that would be impossible to miss. And by the way, guys, if you would have been confronted with this situation where the HOA essentially put a fence through your property and then stole a part of your land to make money with your road, what would you have done? Would you have also instantly contacted lawyers? Let me know in the comments, and while you're at it, please don't forget to like the video because that would help me tremendously. Now let's continue with the story. So that evening, there was a good deal of traffic as residents of the HOA returned home, taking their usual shortcut across my land, only to find their way blocked by my new gate. It was not completely done, but there was more than enough blocking the road to make it impossible for them to pass through. I watched on the security cameras from home as they milled around in confusion. More than one made a phone call, and I had a pretty good idea who they were getting in touch with. Sure enough, it was not even 15 minutes before an enraged HOA president stormed onto the scene, armed with bolt cutters. She went straight for my gate, shouting about how I had just made a terrible mistake and how her lawyers were going to take me for every penny I had. Of course, she was not able to do any real damage with these bolt cutters, but that did not stop her from trying. Her stubbornness turned to be a blessing in disguise because it meant that she was still violently attacking my gate, and when a sheriff's deputy showed up, called by yours truly. And then, right in front of a crowd of tired, frustrated members of her community, the president got arrested for attempted destruction of property and trespassing. The woman simply couldn't believe it, and I could see her mouth hanging open on the camera as the deputy put her in handcuffs, then guided her to the back seat of his cruiser. The daze must have worn off after that, because I could hear muffled yelling on the camera as he started driving her down to the station. Left without any other options, the audience had to leave and go home the long way. I didn't follow up with the sheriff's office, but I still got an update on the situation real quick. So I received a dozen letters the very next day claiming that I was going to be sued for damages, lost property value, and entrapment. The letters were all officially from the HOA board, but I could tell that Karen was behind them. Even if she did not type them out herself, I am sure she badgered the other members of the board into writing them for her. Probably over the phone if she was still in jail. Oh, and they were asking for $50,000 in compensation now. Yeah, I guess $15,000 was not enough for her anymore. Unfortunately for them though, I had already contacted a lawyer and explained my situation, and they were more than happy to take on my case, and they assured me that I was almost guaranteed to win this. After Karen's little stunt, my lawyer bumped that up to absolutely guaranteed. With his help and guidance, I was aiming to expose their fraudulent fee collection scheme and filed some criminal complaints of my own. Now at this point things slowed down a bit, at least on my end. From what I gather though, things were completely chaotic within the HOA. As I understand it, Karen and the rest of the board tried to organize meetings and rally the community against me. She tried to convince them that I was blocking access because I was being petty, a spiteful liar that was going back on my word. However, the situation with the police must have opened a lot of eyes, because I started seeing a whole lot of dissenting opinions online. Part of that was probably because I quietly let a few friendly members of the community know about the fake maintenance scheme, and yeah, they were not happy when they found out about that. And they were more than happy to spread the word all around. If I was in their shoes, I'd probably feel the exact same way, especially since the shortcut on my property saved them at least half an hour. For a round trip, that meant they had to waste an extra hour every time on top of the maintenance fees they'd been paying for nothing at all. Since the president had managed to get on my bad side, that meant they had paid all this money for nothing, then also increased their commutes, more than doubling them in most cases. Funnily enough, property values also started to plummet in the neighborhood. It's not a huge surprise considering how much worse the commute got and the soiled reputation of the HOA, but at the same time it's deeply ironic considering what the HOA president Karen had said to me on our last meeting. It turns out the one bringing down property values was her, not me. Well, during all this, I started to keep in touch with a few more members of the HOA, so I got to hear a lot of juicy gossip right from the source. So for example, more than one homeowner decided to file a complaint with the Attorney General's office. Even if each one didn't amount to anything, it meant that the paper trail was getting pretty big. Things soon came to a boil at one of the HOA meetings. By my understanding, the board called the meeting in a desperate last-ditch effort to get things back under control. I think the board showed up at the meeting expecting they could blame me for all their problems, so they were not at all ready when the entire audience immediately asked for a recall vote. That's right, they just outright recalled the entire HOA board right there on the spot, and they did it by the book too, so there wasn't any way the president could fight back. I think some of the board members meekly backed down because they wanted to keep their heads low and prevent further consequences, but that did not save them from criminal charges. I don't know the details, but there were serious fraud allegations being thrown around too. Once a new board got appointed, I was invited to sit in on meetings if I wanted. As a matter of fact though, I was interested in that, so I got a front row seat to their report on the abysmal state of HOA finances. In spite of the cash they'd been raking in through nonsense fees, they were almost completely bankrupt. Apparently the two main causes were terrible mismanagement by the previous board and extensive legal fees. That was a bit of a surprise to me, because the president had sounded so confident before, but I guess going up against the attorney's office had been a bit more than they could handle, never mind how much of the money she pocketed and squandered herself. The new board negotiated with me directly regarding the original issue of the fence and misuse of my property. We ultimately settled on $35,000 in restitution to me, as well as a much more concrete easement agreement. There would be stricter oversight this time, as well as full acknowledgement that the land belonged to me. I was a little worried that they wouldn't be able to pay this since the HOA finances were in such a dire state, but the new board assured me that this would be a top priority. They could go without a lot of things, but having to drive an extra hour for each round trip out of town was a bridge too far, and the whole community agreed on that. Oh, and needless to say, they paid for the removal of the damn fence and gate installed by the previous HOA. At the end of the day, my land was restored to me and the wrongdoers were punished. In one sense, it was definitely a waste of time and money caused by the pride and greed of an HOA board, but at the same time, it was also a deeply satisfying experience. Being able to get sweet justified revenge almost made the entire process worth it. Initially, I thought that the HOA board was just gonna get hit with some serious fines, but a few members actually ended up behind bars, including the president herself. If nothing else, she now has plenty of time to reflect on the mistakes that led her down this path. I was expecting to get a lot of angry letters and phone calls from her, but I think she was too busy with her overwhelming criminal charges and financial worries to do much else. I also suspect that after she fell from grace, none of the other HOA members were willing to be bullied around by her anymore, so she didn't have any lackeys to type up and send nonsense threats via mail. I also heard that a few board members had to sell their homes in order to pay their fines. Unfortunately for them, they had to do it quickly, so they didn't get the chance to wait for property values to rise again. I suppose it was fitting that they were the main victims of their own scheme, since I think everyone else in the community just waited out the temporary dip before moving. At the same time though, my property did decently rise in value. I don't have any intention of selling at the moment, but the road definitely proved its worth during that debacle, so if I ever do decide to split up the land for real or sell it off completely, I know that I'll be able to get an excellent deal. Even if that day never comes, it feels good to know that something passed down through the family is now being recognized as precious and valuable. I'd say I'm on much better terms with the new HOA board, that may be primarily because they are walking on eggshells around me now. After all, now that they've had to go without access to my road, they are much more concerned about losing access in the future. I'm under no illusions about us being completely aligned, but I do hope that I've made a few friends over there on the individual level. And before we end the video, we will read one last funny story from r/Petty Revenge. It is titled, "Wanna disturb my sleep? You cannot breed now." So there's a cricket, the insect, hiding in a crack in a wall that keeps chirping when I try to sleep. It is so loud and so unrhythmic that I cannot concentrate on sleeping. I understand it's part of nature, and I would love it if it would chirp without giving me insomnia, but no, krr, 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 all night. I try to hunt it out, but it's hiding deep in a crack. Well, one day I noticed that the perpetrator would temporarily go silent if there was a sudden loud noise. It sort of scanned for any other noises before starting again, and that's when I figured how to solve this. So I used a spare phone I had and placed it near the crack. I played the metal pipe falling sound on repeat, loud enough for the cricket to be startled every now and then, but low enough for me to not hear it. It worked. The cricket has not been able to make a single sound all night. It cannot focus on attracting mates now. It cannot come out of the crack fearing there's a predator there. So yeah, it feels great to have a continuous sleep rather than being woken up 5 times in the middle of the night. And yeah guys, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe and I will see you again tomorrow.